My name is Carly Trammell, and this is my presentation on ethical quandaries and decisions for my ethics class. First, I wanted to make a quick notation. All of the verses that I'm going to use on my presentation are from the Holman Christian Standard Version of the Bible. If you do need further information on the Holman Christian Standard Version, please let me know. You can go to hcsb.org, and there's plenty of information there. It happens to be the version of my Bible, and all the verses that I used are from there, so I just want to give a heads up. First, I had to choose 3 biblical passages that define Christian ethics. The first one I picked was Romans 8, 1 through 2. I thought that this did a really good job of outlining that we're not supposed to follow the laws of this world. It mentions even sin or death, but that we're supposed to follow the laws of the Spirit, and I think that's a crucial part of being a Christian and making Christian decisions. The second verse that I chose is Psalms 19:7, which again outlines that the instruction of the Lord is perfect. As C.S. Lewis mentions, that God is trying to get us to be from our imperfect selves to be more perfect like Christ, and therefore it's good to know that God's instructions are perfect and that His testament is trustworthy, so that we know that we have a good basis for our instruction and good rules for us to follow. The final verse that I picked is 1 Timothy 1:5, which I really liked because it had it was a good tie-in of all the other verses. It mentions that we're supposed to follow instructions and gives us guidelines as Christians to how we should be. We should be have a good conscience, have sincere faith, and love from a pure heart. I think that's a really good summation of what Christians should do and how Christians should make decisions as far as ethical situations that occur. A couple of situations or a couple of ethical issues with further insight that I gained from this class. First, I picked the one about business ethics. I thought it was really awesome to see how to handle cultural differences and expectations in a way that doesn't ruin my conscience about disobeying God's law, but it also doesn't put my coworkers who have no part in the decision-making process in a position to be in trouble or suffer from my decisions. I really appreciated figuring out that the Bible does have guidelines for handling business ethical situations, though they're not super clear. It does have guidelines, and that's at least a good place for us to start. Again, back to the verses that I mentioned, God's instruction is perfect, and so we should be seeking to follow that. The second one that I chose was euthanasia, and I included mercy killing and patient rights in there because I think that that's kind of a summation of what we discussed. This discussion was my favorite of the whole class because I got to see really personal responses from everybody. I felt like this was the first situation where they responded what they would do put in that situation rather than what they should do. And to me, that was really eye-opening to see people respond really honestly to the full situation at hand. It also kind of established my number one guideline about the sanctity of life that I use for making decisions about war and decisions about the death penalty, which is my third one. I thought that the death penalty was, again, my second favorite discussion in the class because this was the first discussion where we were all divided. There was definitely a clear-cut line, and we were almost half and half on either in support of the death penalty or against the death penalty. And both sides had clear biblical arguments. They were both very well supported, very well researched. They had a lot of good points and ideas, and seeing both sides allowed me to make a really definitive choice that I felt truly represented what I believe and truly represented my ethical code. I think that it's better that we focus on love and forgiveness as opposed to punishment and justice, and it was really neat to finally align my Christian values with my utilitarian ethics in this situation. Both of them were aligned, which is a good foundation to show that I can do that in the future. So that was why that was my third choice. As far as an ethical case study, I wanted to walk you through the process that I discovered through this class on how to make decisions when presented with an ethical situation. The one that I chose is actually a personal issue, something that came up in my life. And I wanted to put it from the point of view that you are counseling. So you are counseling a newlywed couple. The man cheated on the wife several times when they were dating, but the final year seemed to be really good. They recently got married, and there was a situation where he cheated again, and now you find both of them are in counseling with you to see how to make a godly choice for moving forward with this relationship. A couple of other notes on this are that you can tell that they both have a strong Christian background and moral code. You can see that this is kind of causing a lot of damage to the situation and keeping them from making a firm decision. You see that you know that they both went to their families for moral support and didn't get very good answers, so they're feeling like they're lost in murky waters. You also notice that the woman seems to be leaning towards divorce, while the husband seems to be wanting to keep the relationship together. With that ethical situation in mind, I wanted to, first you want to direct through the facts. Before determining any ethical situation, you need to have a clear outline of what facts you're dealing with and precisely what's going on in the situation. We do know that the husband committed adultery with another woman. He also has a history of cheating. The husband did lie about his situation, and through your counseling sessions, he's admitted to lying about other crucial parts of their relationship. And the husband's grounds for complaint about all of this is that the wife was refusing to have sex with him, which she also admits to, and says that this was on a basis of lack of trust and security. So they both have good arguments, and we've got the facts about that situation. The next step in the process is to go to the Bible, which is our clear and perfect instructions outlined by God. There were a lot of verses on marriage and the sanctity of marriage and divorce and love. I chose 6 that I felt really outlined what we were dealing with. The first 2 are from Deuteronomy, and as you can see, Deuteronomy 22 outlines that if there is adultery that occurs, and if the man commits adultery, then he needs to be killed. This is Mosaic law, so it is going to be extreme as we understand, but it is still outlining an element of Christian law that obviously adultery is considered a high crime. It is a problem. The second verse is verse 24, and I think it's really important that we look at this verse if we're dealing with an idea of marriage or divorce. And it outlines that a man is allowed to hand his wife a divorce certificate and send her out of his home if he finds something, I think it labeled it improper or unfitting about her. This has been used in a lot of situations and stretched to a lot of imperfect rules, and even Jesus later in the New Testament outlines that it's not meant to be, if you find her cooking distasteful, you can divorce her. It's meant to be more of a situation of, if, say, you got married on the grounds that she was a virgin and you find out she wasn't, something like that. He does discuss this with the Pharisees very clearly, and it's easy to see that they mean sexual impurity here rather than any other situation. The next verse is from 1 Corinthians 7. It's verses 3 through 4. And it outlines that the wife doesn't have authority over her own body, that it belongs to the husband, and that the husband doesn't have authority over his, it belongs to the wife. This verse is really important because it identifies that a relationship, that a marriage should be a relationship of give and take. Both spouses now belong to each other. They need to make decisions together. They need to communicate, that kind of idea. When you take this verse into account, you can see where both people in the relationship that you're counseling went wrong. It seems like the man was thinking more of himself, and that caused the woman to think more of herself, which created a situation where they were independent, and the man felt like he had to go to another place to find sexual pleasure. Because of this, you can kind of identify, okay, here's where they both went wrong, but how do we make a good decision moving forward? The next couple of verses all come from Ephesians 5, which lays out a lot of guidelines about submission and who should submit to who and how the relationship should work. And they all say kind of the same thing, that wives should submit to the husband, that he should be the head of the household, but he should love the wife His job is to love the wife as Christ loved the church. Christ established the church. Christ built up the church. He made sure the church was kept pure. He made sure that it was clean and that it was proper and things like that. And that's the husband's job, that she should submit to him, but he has the role of head. He needs to be making intelligent decisions and godly decisions and giving her an example to follow. Though this may seem to put her at fault, you really see that here the man is at fault because he didn't follow a godly moral code. He didn't follow the perfect instructions that God laid out for him to follow. Therefore, she pulled back. Therefore, he made another egregious mistake. In the same way that he who loves his wife loves himself, obviously the man was not loving the wife the way that he would love himself, or she wouldn't feel insecure and she wouldn't feel like there was a lack of trust. And if that's what she is feeling, then how does that look upon the man, that he can't trust himself, that he has no love for himself, that he feels unsafe with himself? And so obviously there's a really disjunct measure here between the husband and the wife. So now we can identify a few more facts. The wife is considering divorce on grounds of adultery and destruction of trust, which we can see clearly in those Bible verses is actually something that are viable grounds for divorce. There are other teachings of God and further discussions with Jesus that outline adultery as the main grounds, as the only unsinful grounds for divorce, the only one that doesn't put both members in a situation of adultery, because there was already adultery. The wife is also concerned. You can see that she's concerned about Christian standards and making a godly and intelligent decision. She doesn't want to, she's actively seeking to follow God's perfect instructions and just seems lost on what to do. By almost every Christian standard, adultery is grounds for divorce, and the man did commit adultery against the wife. It's very important. I did a study with, there was a man named Ross, and I looked at his work and his readings, and he's a known Christian researcher, and he writes articles for the Christian Research Institute. And he mentioned that the two reasons for legitimate divorce are clearly set forth by Jesus Christ. His apostles in the New Testament, adultery and desertion remain the only two explicit reasons whereby a person may divorce a spouse, i.e., if he cheats on his wife, she cheats on him, or they did mention desertion as well, which is, say the man goes off to war and doesn't come back forever. At that point, she doesn't need to be staying in the relationship because there's already been a division. So research and biblical study that you've done as a counselor for this situation shows that adultery is considered grounds for divorce and is not considered a sinful action. Because of this, I can now make a decision as a counselor. If I were in the situation where I was counseling this couple, I would push the husband toward counsel with God and to really seek repentance for his sins. Obviously, he's got a lot going on that he needs to deal with. And because of this, I would push the wife toward a legal Christian-based divorce. I think it's important that she doesn't stay in a situation where she's going to have continual hurt and continual pain. And obviously the relationship is already breaking. So trying to reform that is going to be kind of continuing a bad thing rather than ending it to start a new good thing. It's not ending a good thing, or the relationship wouldn't be here to begin with. I would help them both understand where they went wrong. My goal as a counselor is to make sure that in future situations they have the steps and the process they need to make sure this doesn't happen again in their next relationship. So I make sure that they understand what guidelines are making this decision and where I'm coming from in how to properly align them on their path. I also want them to trust my choice, so I would outline why I made this choice and why I'm pushing them to make these decisions. I would also direct the husband towards Paul's teaching about single men and sexual impurity. Now that he is going, since I'm pushing her towards divorce, he's going to be a single man. And I think that Paul's teachings really do a good job of outlining what single men should do, how single men should act, and what counts as sexual impurity and what doesn't. And finally, I would probably suggest further Christian-based counseling for their future lives. Not a long one, but at least enough. There's going to be scars. There's going to be a deep-seated emotional injuries that they're going to need to work through in order to have better founded relationships in the future. So I think of it like this: the man and the husband and wife joined, and they became one flesh. If you've ever seen conjoined twins split, there are scars. There's scar tissue, and there's definitely something that needs to be done about that. Well, in the same way, these people are going to need emotional healing and spiritual healing to go forth in their lives. Finally, an ethical quandary where I remain undecided would be the idea of war. I'm still having a really hard time figuring out where I stand on war. Obviously, as we've seen before, I do hold the sanctity of life to be a good thing. I think that God should be the ultimate judge of who lives and dies. That being said, that makes war seem pretty wrong. It's essentially sending a bunch of people to kill a bunch of other people, and there is lots of death that wasn't determined by God, it was determined by man. Both sides have strong biblical backing. Obviously, the side that's on the side for war, that's going for war, is quoting a lot of Old Testament, where God did ask, for example, Joshua to go forth and kill and destroy a bunch of cities. There's also other situations where there was wars cited on by God or looked upon as good by God, and so that's probably one that a lot of people will cite. As for the other side, a lot of people cite, Jesus says forgiveness and turn the other cheek. The idea that our job as Christians is to love, not kill. Again, back to the sanctity of life and how important it is that we maintain that. You're going to have to live in a world with war no matter what. So if you're against war, how do you make that coincide with your conscience? How do you align that with your own conscience? You don't want to spend your whole life feeling guilty about something you had no control over. And so you're going to have to figure out how that works. And I have a lot of family members that went to war. My younger brother wants to join the military as soon as he's out of high school. So if I decide that I'm against war, how do I keep those relationships in a positive light? In order to make this decision, I think some more information that I should seek to decide is I would want further understandings of New Testament teaching versus Old Testament practice. Precisely when Jesus came and died on the cross and that fulfilled the law, what parts of the law did that fulfill? What things should now be unnecessary? How should we Christians act now versus how we were supposed to act then? Not saying that any of God's instructions were imperfect or incomplete, but that Jesus came and fulfilled those. And so I'd like to do some more studies of where that line is drawn. If I do agree with war, I would need to find severe guidelines that make sure that I know why and when war is acceptable. Obviously, I don't think going to war over burnt toast is a good idea, but I don't think that we should stand back idly and watch as people viciously murder people. We needed to stop Hitler, and going to war seemed to be the only method that worked. So how do we figure out where there's an in-between there? How do we have guidelines to make sure that if we do go to war, that it's just and right? And if I disagree with war, I need to do research and do studies and figure out how to keep, obviously, my family relationships good and not judge other people for their decisions and things along those lines. So I think it would be really important for me to have that research and those information to further formulate my opinion and make sure that I have a clear conscience with my decisions and can understand that I'm going to live in a world where this is a very real thing, where war is a reality. These are my references. I used my Bible, and I did mention that study by Ross, and this has been my final presentation for ethics. Thank you.